Right, so we have some new details on the iPad mini 6, allegedly getting the A15 instead of the A14, and also apparently adopting USB Type-C and a smart connector. And so let's delve into the report, but first make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumors, and with that being said, let's just tuck in. Right, so the source of the information is 9to5Mac. They have a 78% accuracy rating, so yes, we can trust this information. Right, so delving in, the main tidbit 9to5Mac delves into is the fact we could see the A15 in the next generation iPad mini instead of the A14 a lot of previous reports were suggesting. Now guys, I can't lie, I'm a little unsure whether this is true or not because I can see both sides of the argument. For example, I can see why Apple might give the iPad mini 6 the A15 because obviously it's going to get a price hike over the current iPad mini because of the new design, and so for $499 Apple could of course give us a flagship SoC to justify the higher premium for the new design. You could also argue this is for better software support, since Apple rarely touches the iPad mini lineup in the first place, and so I'm sure the iPad mini 6 is gonna be sold for years to come, and so maybe Apple's future-proofing the device by giving it the flagship processor of 2021, which is the A15. But also I can understand the other side of this argument because obviously the main question a lot of you guys might have is, of course, the iPad Air 4 has the A14, and so isn't it going to be a little weird that the iPad mini 6 has a better processor for a cheaper price? Well, again, there are two sides to this question because on one hand, yes, that is true, and so maybe that could be a reason why we do see the A14 in the iPad mini 6. Also, do remember that in the past, the iPad mini has always got the last generation A series processor. In fact, that's nearly always been the case apart from one model, and that is the iPad mini 2 in 2013 that came with the flagship A7. But of course, that's the exception, not the rule, and so yes, that might be suggesting that the iPad mini 6 is gonna get the A14 instead of the A15. Also, leakers like Mark Gurman and John Prosser have suggested the iPad mini 6 is going to be a smaller version to the iPad Air 4, so it has pretty much near identical specs, and John even explicitly said that yes, he's heard about the A14 coming to the iPad mini, not the A15. But then we come to the other side of this question because we all know a new version of the iPad Air should be launching in early 2022, and so maybe Apple's already preparing the range and giving the iPad mini 6 the A15 upgrade, and then the iPad Air follows suit a few months later. And yes, I know I just mentioned the rule about the iPad mini always getting the last generation A series chips, but do remember the iPad mini 5 and the iPad Air 3 when they launched in 2019 were near identical, and so it makes sense that a future iPad Air 5 and the iPad mini 6 are pretty much on par with each other when it comes to the specifications. And so yes, temporarily the iPad Air 4 is inferior to the iPad mini 6, and then eventually the iPad Air 5 catches up. I mean, we did kind of see this with the 2020 iPad Pro and the iPad Air 4, because you might remember the iPad Air 4 had the A14, and the iPad Pro at the time had the A12Z, and that looks really weird because the cheaper iPad had the newer chip, but of course Apple fixed that within a few months with the release of the M1 iPad Pro, and so similar to that, we could also see the release of the iPad Air 5 that could fix this potential confusion too. So yes, you can understand why I'm so unsure about this, and it does get even worse because I've seen some mention that Apple won't do the temporary measure I mentioned earlier, so Apple won't keep around the iPad Air 4 with the A14 alongside a cheaper A15 powered iPad mini 6, and so that could mean two things. Either we see the iPad Air 5 in September alongside the iPad mini 6, or of course the iPad mini 6 gets pushed back till the spring to release alongside the iPad Air 5. I think I've kind of confused myself at this point, so let me give you guys my final thoughts. I think Apple's gonna give the iPad mini 6, the A14, I think Apple's gonna stick with their usual pattern where they give the iPad mini the last generation A series processor. Why do I think this? Well, I think it's because the iPad mini 6 at $500 with the A15 could be too good of a deal, especially compared to the iPad Air 5. Because in the past, even if the specs between the iPad Air and the iPad mini were identical, obviously the iPad mini had a much smaller display, and so that's why I think the iPad mini remained as a niche product, even if it had the same specs as the iPad Air for $100 cheaper. But now with the redesign, the iPad mini is going to get a much larger display. It's going to be around 8.5 to 9 inches, and that's not a massive difference anymore, and so maybe more people will be open to getting the iPad mini over the iPad Air, especially if it's going to have the same specs and of course is going to be $100 cheaper. And so yes, either Apple makes the iPad Air 5 slightly more powerful with an A15X that I delved into in a previous video that you can check out in the icon above, or more realistically, Apple gives the iPad mini 6 the A14 instead of the A15. And by the way, in case you're wondering, Apple does ideally want you to buy the iPad Air because they can sell you on accessories, especially that really expensive Magic Keyboards that won't work with the iPad mini 6. And so yes, I can see Apple giving the iPad mini 6 an inferior SoC compared to the iPad Air 5, to ultimately upsell you to the iPad Air and get you to spend more money. Anyways, talking about accessories, let's now delve into the smart connector allegedly on the iPad mini 6. So for some reason, a lot of people think the smart connector automatically means we're going to see a Magic Keyboard Mini for the iPad mini, but that is not realistic because imagine how cramped the keyboard would be on an iPad mini. That would be a terrible writing experience. And so yes, I don't think we're seeing a keyboard on this iPad mini. That would be an utterly stupid idea in my opinion. So what could the smart connector be used for? Well, it's going to be a pretty boring answer, but I think it's going to be for smart folio cases like we have on the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. That makes the most sense. So yes, don't expect anything special to come out of the smart connector on the iPad mini 6. And finally, let's delve into USB Type-C coming to the iPad mini 6. Now this really should not be a surprise because we have it on the iPad Pro and the iPad Air. So of course, if we know the iPad mini 6 is getting the iPad Pro makeover, then it makes sense. It gets a USB-C port too. And that's really everything because the last tidbit is the fact the iPad mini 6's codename is J310. But of course, no one cares about internal codenames, and so let me know in the comments below, do you think the iPad mini 6 is getting the A15 or the A14? Anyways, make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumors. Check out the video in the icon above on details regarding the iPhone SE 3. And on that note, I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya, peeps.